From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. We are gearing up for another week in the Alabama legislature as the session enters the home stretch. More on that in a bit. But leading the news tonight is an update on a state veterans nursing home that caught fire late last week. The Benny Adkins State Veterans Nursing Home opened earlier this year and has been lauded as a world-class facility for state veterans. But on Wednesday, a fire was reported as eyewitnesses said they saw smoke billowing from the roof. This video is from WTVY News 4 in Dothan. According to the Alabama Department of Veterans Affairs, the fire did not damage any of the residential wings of the facility, and all 90 veterans were evacuated within 25 minutes. VA Commissioner Jeff Newton said today that the fire has been extinguished and that no injuries occurred during the incident. He said damage is still being assessed, but that work to repair and reopen the facility would be done as soon as possible. The commissioner also made a point to thank first responders and the enterprise community for the difference they made in keeping everyone safe. Well, each year around this time, state leaders put the legislative session on hold to honor distinguished members of the state's law enforcement community and recognize their heroic work. This year, Shelby County Deputy Brad Bush was awarded the Legislative Medal of Honor for his bravery in fighting off and disarming a gunman during a dangerous encounter involving gunfire.
You know, to me, this is a special year for law enforcement. One thing that this body has done working with the Senate is trying to make sure that people of Alabama knows that the state legislature has your back. You know, the bills that we've passed this year with a package of over 7 bills and resolutions to make sure that we can give your families scholarships, to make sure that we can help your families that need help in time of crisis. So I am appreciative of the Mr. Pro Tem, for what y'all are doing in the Senate for those bills. Thank you.
I would like to thank all law enforcement officers, past and present, that are here with us today and who are not with us today. Today we honor Deputy Bush. I'm especially thankful for your service and all that you have done and your family being here with us today. So thank you for taking this special time with us. Our law enforcement officers and the work that they do are the bedrock of our communities, and we will continue to support them in the strongest way possible, not only in the House, but also obviously in the Alabama State Senate.
The House and Senate will convene on Tuesday for the 24th legislative day. They have 7 days now remaining in this 2025 session, so we are entering the home stretch. Let's take a look at some of the notable legislation still awaiting passage this session. Of course, at the top of the list are the state's budgets. These aren't controversial, but there's still some work left to do. The Education Trust Fund has passed the Senate and is now ready to move in the House, and vice versa. The General Fund has passed the House and is awaiting action in the Senate. The respective committees are expected to take these budgets up this week, and we could see floor passage by Thursday. House Bill 477 from State Representative David Faulkner, which is the Alpha Farm Bureau Health Plan bill. It is awaiting a vote in the Senate Insurance and Banking Committee, which is set to meet Tuesday at 10 o'clock. Senate Bill 92 from State Senator Donnie Chasteen, the proposed ban on cell phones in schools. It is through the Senate, through a House committee, and ready for final passage on the House floor. The only problem is there are no Senate bills being taken up right now in the House, since the two chambers had a little tiff about advancing legislation. We will be watching to see if that settles down this week. House Bill 521 and Senate Bill 268. These bills would allow so-called ready-to-drink cocktail beverages to be sold alongside beer and wine in grocery and convenience store. Right now, you can only get those items in liquor stores. The bills are through committee and ready for floor votes in their respective chambers. Senate Bill 186 from State Senator Clyde Chambliss, which would require cell phone manufacturers to activate porn filters on cell phones sold to minors. And its companion Senate Bill 187, which would require App Store providers like Facebook and Instagram to include age verifications. Those bills passed the Senate last week and could be in House committee this week. And finally, House Bill 7, the Laken-Riley Act. This is one of several immigration bills awaiting final passage. It is through the House and should be in Senate committee this week. Some sad news from over the weekend. Former Lieutenant Governor George McMillan passed away at the age of 81. McMillan was a force in Alabama politics, where his career really began at Auburn, where he was elected SGA president. He went on to serve in the Alabama House and Alabama Senate and was elected lieutenant governor in 1978. He ran for governor in 1982 and narrowly lost to George Wallace in the primary. McMillan would go on to be an unofficial statesman in Birmingham, helping with tourism and economic development. Governor Kay Ivey was close friends with McMillan since their days at Auburn. She said he treasured being in public service throughout his life and that he will be greatly missed. Coming up after the break, I'll talk with political columnist Steve Flowers about George McMillan's extraordinary life.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Alabama Public Television is your place for quality educational services. Free professional development for educators and child care providers. Access to free curriculum-aligned videos, lesson plans, and instructional resources with PBS Learning Media. And all the PBS Kids programs parents know and trust. Learn something new every day with Alabama Public Television. Visit us at aptv.org/education to learn more.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is political columnist Steve Flowers. Steve, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Todd. Good to be with you.
Always good to be with you. Always get great feedback from viewers when you're on to talk about some of these, not just your observations, but memories from politics, and especially the interview we did with Jabbo and Senator Wagner. I may want to get back to that, but I wanted to start with the sad news that George McMillan passed away over the weekend. He is a political legend in this state. I wondered what your thoughts were from his career.
You know, George was a superstar coming out of the gate. He was an outstanding student at Auburn University and was actually president of the SGA. And actually, ironically, he and Kay Ivey were classmates at Auburn and political friends and allies and leaders in the student government. Jimmy Rain was a couple of years behind them, was in the same group. But he came out of Auburn, must have done well in school at Auburn academically besides being president of the SGA because he went to Virginia Law School. I mean, he was at the UVA Law School. So went to UVA Law School, came back to Birmingham, settled in, even though he graduated from Auburn High School. Daddy was an extension agent around the state, so he'd grown up in Greenville and graduated Auburn High School, but was outstanding at Auburn University, went to Virginia. Then he came back to Birmingham, married Ann Roper Dial, whose father was a very prominent businessman there. And soon after getting back to Birmingham, he got into politics. There was an open house seat, and he got elected to that at a young age. And then he took on a line of the state senate named George Lewis Bales, who was probably the most prominent state senator in the state, especially the best parliamentarian and very robust man. Nobody thought he was beatable. He beat him in a special election for open seat, not open, challenged him in a Senate seat. So he was recognized as being a superstar.
So it was a long shot.
It was a long shot. He beat George Lewis Bales like a drum, though, and then he came out of there, and 4 years later, after one term in the Senate, ran for lieutenant governor, was elected, and then started running for governor right after that. It was assumed that Wallace was not going to run again. Wallace had served 3 terms, and when Wallace left in '78 and Fob James became governor, Fob James was governor in '78, and McMillan was his lieutenant governor. And so McMillan started running for governor and did, and Wallace coming back did not deter George. And George would have beaten Wallace in the Democratic primary, which was tantamount to election at that time.
Right. Kind of like the Republican is now.
Same way the Republican Party is now. It was tantamount to election. So you won the Democratic primary, you won the governor's race. And so he came with an eyelash, just an eyelash of beating Wallace. And the only reason Wallace won, and history books tell you this, and we may have talked about this, Wallace got the black vote. Ironically,
yeah,
he'd gone down to Dexter King
flipped.
Church.
Right, he flipped because he basically apologized for his segregationist.
And they accepted it, and they elected him. And Macmillan assumed that was not going to happen, that he'd be the progressive, pro New South governor. And George was recognized nationwide as bringing Alabama into the new century and being a New South governor, the same way Brewer was 10 years earlier. When Wallace beat Brewer in 1970, they thought Brewer would beat Wallace, and he was going to be a New South governor. Alabama would have the progressive New South governor. Macmillan was labeled the same way 10 years later in '82.
And it was different back then too, right? Because you could only serve one term consecutively. So it's not like Fobb had a chance to run for re-election. It was wide open, right?
It was wide open, and then, so Macmillan was able to tee off and get ready for that race, and he did, and he would have won. He came back after losing that '82 race to Wallace and ran in '86, but that was the year Baxley and Braddock ran, and they had that debacle. And then Guy Hunt ultimately won because of what happened in the Democratic thing, and that was the end of the Democratic thing.
We could have a whole show about that election, really.
Yeah, you could, and but George was through after that too. His career. He started city stages in Birmingham.
I was going to say he went back to Birmingham and really became a statesman for the city. Is that a good way to describe it?
Well, he was a salesman for the city. That city stages thing was a big deal. It was considered one of the best musical festivals throughout the country. I mean, they would have every major band, Earth, Wind, and Fire. I mean, it'd be like, every major group, 26. You'd walk around the city stage, there'd be 26 different bands, venues playing. It was a heck of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he was a friend of this show and also to the Daily News. He was always register an opinion and on the news of the day, and I always just took that as very kind and supportive ever since I got started. So I really want to express how much I appreciated George McMillan just as I don't know if you call it a mentor or a great example, because you got a lot of these folks that are up and comers rising up, wanting to do the same thing, and it's good to remember that he did it first.
One thing I'll say, you saying that, I didn't realize you had a personal relationship with him, but if you ever, I'll say this in all respect to George McMillan, if you ever met and knew George, I never saw anybody who didn't like him. Yeah. You couldn't help but like him. He had just a winning person, a very vivacious personality.
Absolutely, a very, very nice man, and may his memory be a blessing. Let's switch gears, talk about legislative session. Here we are entering the home stretch, if you will. We've got, 8 days left. So what are your observations to the session up to this point?
I think it's been successful. Anytime you have a good budget, you've had a good session. And I'll say this in deference to the Republicans being the majority since 2010. Since that time began, they have budgeted very prudently. I mean, I remember, years when we'd go into proration every year, and they were budgeting more than they had. They put a lot of rainy day funds away. They did a very frugal job, and I got to tip my hat to Arthur Orr, the chairman of education, and Danny Garrett in the House, and then all written in the Senate, and Rex Reynolds in the House. They've continued this really good budgeting, and I think that other states are not having that kind of success with their budgets because they spent their COVID money, so to speak. I think we realized it was one-time money. Our leaders did in the budget committees and did that, and so I think the last few weeks you've seen this over the years, tensions.
Oh yeah.
Tensions get tough. I mean, they're contentious things, and they've taken, the Republican majority, supermajority, has taken a whip, if you would, to the Democrats a little bit too much, I think, and just
with the cloture.
And run over them a little bit. You've got some really good Democrats that try and do the right thing. Smitherman does, and Bobby Singleton. I mean, they're leaders. They've been there a long time, and they don't ask for much. They're not trying to take the whole state over or anything. All they want to do is do things for their constituents.
They kind of want their bills on at least on the agenda.
Exactly.
Which I guess that everybody's asking that question. Why not just to kind of placate or just play nice and have a productive day? Just put a couple bills on. But I guess there's only so many bills that Republicans would want to be on the Democratic bills to be on the calendar.
It's the harmony's fallen off the track the last few days, and probably the last of the session. But it's still going to be a successful session. I mean, they're going to pass what they have to pass, and you know, the Republicans take the social issues or the red meat issues too much to the wall, and actually one of the Democratic legislators from Bessemer, one of the freshmen, made a good point the other day by saying, you know, a lot of this stuff is going up in court, and it wound up costing the state a lot of money legally to defend things they know are not constitutional.
You're thinking like Ten Commandments, prayer in school, and all
things
that kind
like
of
that
stuff,
you do to placate the constituency. You know, they could cut back on some of that because it really doesn't amount to a hill of beans. I mean, it's not going to be constitutional anyway, so you know, that's the only thing I can say. But you know, that's just politics.
Right. I do agree with you on the budgeting, and I really like having our budget chairs on so they can explain it. And it's not sexy, and that's the whole point. It should be boring, right? If you're budgeting well, it should be boring. And we know that we could have some rough budget years ahead, and goodness, if those rainy day accounts weren't there. I remember the last really painful round of proration was in that 2012, 2013 range, and it affected both budgets, and it was painful. And there's not that many that are still around, but those that are, they know that they don't want to go through that pain again.
Todd, one thing that happened, and I don't know if it was because of legislative action or the courts, but we were looking at a real bleak time in the general fund because of everybody buying everything online now, and us losing that tax. And them being able to get that, I've talked to Steve Klaus, who chaired the general fund for several years, one of my best friends, and he said that's been the salvation, and it's really helped the general fund.
Right.
Is to get that money off that sales tax that the stores are not getting because everybody's buying things on Amazon now.
Sure, and locally too. It helps them on the local taxes as well.
I was surprised talking about that, the success of the local pharmacists winning their bill. I didn't think that had a chance for the session.
I think you got to say, so far, that's probably the biggest victory of the session because, last year it got defeated badly.
I know.
The opponents were able to characterize it as a tax, and that was it. You know, tax on drugs. But they were clever about it this time, kind of a different way of going about it. But they had such a united front. I've never seen so many pharmacists up here in the halls, and it wasn't just that one, pharmacist day. It was consistent. They had a presence up here, unanimous in both houses. This is a huge win for the pharmacists.
That was the biggest surprise of the session to me so far, and how it came back, and it was almost unanimous vote.
Yeah, both houses. Gambling died. I guess that was somewhat expected. But what's your take on? Did you expect anything different in terms of? I mean, Albritton clearly wanted to have a bill, a comprehensive bill, but I guess they just kind of ran out of time.
That's what it was. I think the sale of the Birmingham race course by the McGregor family to the Indian casinos is going to make that ultimately pass. And I
because
think
they have a stake.
That's really what they want. Is they want that Birmingham place. That location is ideal and everything for them. It'll draw Atlanta people, and that's where the real money is. And I think ultimately you will see it pass. But what happened was it came so late in the session, and so many things are still on the plate, and Gudger's learning the ropes, and he's drinking out of a water hydrant, and they just threw it at him, and of course, when that comes out, everybody wants a piece of the pie.
Right.
I want this for Medicaid, I want this for my district, I want this, and I want roads.
That got, yeah.
And so you've got to have a governor or a leader in the House like Ledbetter did last year, take control and say, look, this is the way it's going to be. We're going to start from the session, and we're going to have our I's dotted and T's crossed, and we're going to pass this thing. You can't throw it to 2/3 in the session in the middle of the thing.
Well, next year's an election year.
Yeah.
Everybody says gambling is not something you want to pass in an election year. Is that true, or is that just kind of old adage?
I think it's true in old ways, but let me say something about that. Legislature has become more like Congress in that if you get there, you're almost reelected. Mm-hmm. You will see those races decided in January of next year. See, they qualify in January.
Right.
And out of 140 seats in the legislature, unless there are people retiring, I would wager, since we're talking about wagering, I would wager that out of 140 legislators, especially the more powerful ones, I bet you 80% of the legislators are going to run unopposed.
And so if you're unopposed and the qualifying ends
in January,
right?
The session starts.
So I guess you're saying there's less political risk than maybe there used to be. feet being held to the fire by a constituency that is probably more anti-gambling than just the general population.
That and I think the race will be over in January. I think that they'll know where they got opponents. So ironically, I think this year, and I think the leadership in the Senate knew this, that most of those people are not going to have opponents. And it'll be over next year. So ironically, this was the election year test, I think.
Interesting. Oh, okay. I've never thought about it like that.
I think this was the election year test, that if you're going to have a vote, it was going to be scrutinized. They may not be scrutinized. They be home.
Right.
When they come back next year, they're home.
Well, maybe we need to change the conventional wisdom that we could actually see gambling come back next year. While we're getting into the election, I did want to ask you about that, because the campaign might as well be here, right? We'll start raising money in about a month from now. The big question is the governor's race, right? I think this time last year, everybody kind of thought maybe it's Will Ainsworth, Steve Marshall. Marshall said he's not interested. Now it's Ainsworth. Now everybody's talking about Tuberville. I mean, you stay attuned to this kind of stuff. Is this Tuberville for governor talk real?
Definitely. I think it started about 6 months ago, and I think that's the whole big question mark and the holdup of the whole thing. Tuberville's the wild card.
Right.
And the big gorilla in the room, or however you want to say it.
Well, his approval ratings amongst Republicans are just very high.
Oh, yeah. If he runs for governor, and if Trump were to endorse him, he probably wins. And I think everybody knows that. And I think he knows it. And I think he's sitting back. I hear different things every day. He's not, he is. I'm hearing more and more that he is, though. Mm-hmm. And I think that's causing a domino effect of other people, where they're going to go.
Well, yeah, because and Ainsworth's been, sitting ready to run for probably this entire term. And so, does he continue to run? Because that's a real uphill battle, it seems like, although he seems pretty prepared in his own right.
I think Ainsworth is in good shape if Tuberville does not run. Ainsworth done his homework, and he's got a lot of politicos for him. I really believe if Tuberville gets in that race. Now, first of all, I'm surprised it hadn't started already. I thought April 15th you'd see a lot of people getting in the races. I think what you're saying is right. May 26th is the day I look for. You'll get a decision from Tuberville and some of the other question marks at that time on May 26th. That's when money can start being raised. I believe when all's said and done, and I wrote this last week, in most states, being a U.S. senator is a lot bigger and better job than being a governor. Matter of fact, in most states, I'd say 35 or 40 of them, governor is simply a stepping stone to the U.S. Senate.
You got two thinking about doing it right now: Brian Kemp in Georgia and Chris Beshear in Kentucky. They're looking for that promotion. And U.S. Senate is a pretty cool job.
It is the best job in the world. And Tuberville's at an age where if you're 71 years old, you're in the majority. You're Trump's best friend in the Senate. I'd stay in the Senate. Now, of course, I grew up around politics, and if you'd asked me when I'm getting around to saying about Ainsworth, if you'd asked me at 45 years old, could I be a U.S. senator or governor, I'd say, there ain't no question about it. I'm going to the Senate.
Right.
You're governor 4 years, and you may or may not come out with you may be besmirched by that, but you go to the Senate, you can stay there for 35 years and be a power. So I can't understand Tuberville's interest in running for governor, but I think he is leaning that way. And I think if he does, I think that Ainsworth's closest allies will say, Will, if I was 44 years old and I could go to the U.S. Senate, that's where I'd run for it. I think ultimately, if Tuberville runs, I think the race that we'll be watching will be the U.S. Senate race.
Well, I guess a lot of perplexing decisions are being made about who's running for what, but it's always fun to talk about it. This is going to be a long political year, so I hope you'll come back and share some of your observations.
I would love to. I love being on. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
The Cahaba lily, named for the Cahaba River, is an aquatic plant native to the major river systems of Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. In Alabama, its best known natural habitat is the shoals of the Cahaba River. The lily is known for the striking beauty of its 3-inch wide white flowers. Each flower's 6 petals surround a thin corona, which connects the lower portions of the stamens. The lily's scientific name, Hymenocallis coronaria, translated as beautiful crown-like membrane, accurately depicts these characteristics. The lily requires a very specialized habitat of swift-flowing water over rocks and an open canopy. The plant's bulbs and seeds spend the winter buried in the rocky riverbed. Leaves begin to emerge above the waterline in mid-April. Flowering commences in mid-May, reaching its peak in late May and early June. The showy flowers attract a variety of pollinators as well as large numbers of canoers and kayakers during the spring blooming period.
You're watching Alabama Public Television, celebrating 70 years of service to Alabama.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow night with more coverage of the Alabama legislature right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.